All right, welcome everybody to What Makes It Tick. And today we're going to be talking to some of our friends in the community that made a little trip over to Paris. And there was some sporting stuff going on there. So we're going to kind of get a little behind the scenes a little bit. Next week, we already have planned, as we've talked about before, it's time to roll out Nimble. So next week, we're going to be showing some of the new website that's being rolling out this week and also some of the new steps and functionality that it's going to bring to our fellow production aficionados and those that are in the business. So now I want to welcome everybody here. We have guys back. Yay. Robert's here. Grant, all the way from down under. He can't miss me. He misses me because we saw each other last night on Extra Hours, which, by the way, if you haven't caught that yet, is a kind of a laid back little show that we do, question and answers and stuff. Kind of an offshoot of the office hours, but for the other hemisphere. And then welcome, Chris. Good to see you. And then we have joining us straight from Paris, a la Stuttgart now. He's figuring out his camera. It's barely working now because it's been so long since it's been on. Oh, there he is. Jonas has joined us now.
Can you even hear me?
And welcome, Bo, also. Yeah, we hear you. We see you. Good to see you, man. We really have missed you. It seems like it's been, what, a month?
35 days.
Were you counting the days? Did you feel it?
At the end, I did.
Yeah.
But it's a good thing. Like, might as well be for that sporting event.
Yeah. Understandable. Well, let's get into it. So what were you doing there besides putting out fires that would happen from time to time? So let's start with the overall part of what you were there to support.
I was part of a group within Ross Video, because Ross isn't only switcher company or robotics company or whatever. They also have a special group that does production services and creative services. And we were doing the virtual production. So we did some AR elements to the broadcaster. We did the tracking. We put it all together for 3 different venues and then made sure that didn't break and was able to be out.
Very good. And so 3 different venues. So 3 different linear or I guess non-linear, linear, it's all the same at this point because it was like streaming central for everything coming out of the Olympics. So this year, what were the 3 venues? What sports?
Gym, swim, and athletics. So like the 3 main venues.
Oh, so you got to see a lot of fun stuff then.
That's one of the perks. You get to see a lot of the US athletes.
Yeah, we did okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Did okay. We had a few medals here and there. Well, so in the AR side of things, was this mostly, and I'm familiar with a bit of what the Ross offerings are in that world. Was this using tracking information off the cameras and such? So you're coordinating that telemetry, or is this severely just basically optical at this point?
Well, so let's start at the back of the pipeline. We
All
had, let's see if I can share my screen. I'm gonna share this screen.
It's been so long.
Well, and Zoom shows you a different preview picture, then it will actually start sharing. So that's a little infuriating. But yeah, so this is we actually flew in a little early and we pulled our 3 racks, gold, silver, and bronze that Bo named them, very fitting. Bo's really good at names. It's I'm always like, and then Bo has a great name. We had 3 of those kits consisting out of 3 cases, the core rack, our AR rack, and then one special thing is we also used Mirror, the Ross replay product, and we were able to match replay video with a replay of our tracking data. So one of the cool things we could do is, for example, let's say gym or something where you get the results very late. we can record a really cool move of the jib in data and video. And the producer might say, hey, I want to put the results in that graphic, like the results of metals or whatever. But we might not have that information while we do that move. So at that point, what this allows us to do is we bank that shot. And then after the fact, since this was not live to air, this was edited, we could say, hey, and here's that shot with the current data, or if something changed, or I don't know, a medalist got a medal revoked or something like that changed. We could actually fix it in post, was how we were joking, because like normally you're live and everything is what's live is done, but we could
Right.
fix it in post. So that was a really cool capability for us, but also for the producers. Like we had a couple situations where I'm exaggerating, but like it's like, hey, can we do a graphic for that race? And you're like, that race just started 20 seconds ago, but sure. And you just was kind of cool
Back
to
it
have
up,
it behind the
slip and
scenes.
slide to where you needed it so that you could integrate everything together.
Exactly. So
Very cool.
those are the two core, the three racks that we had. We had a little office where we staged it all. Bo, I, and the rest of the team flew in, I think 10 days or a week early and prepped this, did some other tests. And then we deployed them in 3 different venues. Was fun. So here is our 2 little racks. 2 of the racks for the third rack. I don't have a picture right now. Sitting in the venues in the little spot. One of them right next to the track, the other one at TOC in 2 different venues. And we just look at the equipment real quick. Typical power management. We had KVMs everywhere. So one of the cool things with this is we can put our core rack somewhere else than the operator is. So we don't have to be the guys that make the whole graphics cabin loud and noisy and hot and cooling
Right.
and all that. We can put that in a dedicated space. We get fiber and then we run everything over fiber. So you just give us a couple strands to our operator station and that's it.
Beautiful.
Then these are the 3 racks. An Carbonite Ultra open gear frame with a bunch of cards in. So we could do HDR down conversion. One of the big things with this Olympics was that the spec that everyone delivered at is 1080p HDR HLG. So it's not 1080p 50, and that's especially cool for like people that worked a lot in Europe know that we often still like our eye. So I was excited about
True.
1080p 50. Yeah, so that was our HD. That was one of the challenges that we needed to pass proper HDR, pass the HLG curve, and all that. So we have a Carbonite there, which really we use as a router plus multi-viewer, but also 1 or 2 audio mixes. It's great for that. Like it's totally
Right.
overpowered, but great for that. And then the open gear frame had a couple cards in it, multi-dyne cards, so we could have a direct link up to the jib. Had a multi-dyne box there that gave us the tracking data. The cool thing is we have 3 venues, and every venue kind of had a different challenge with tracking. So like one we used Stipes Red Spy. That's an infrared sensor that you mount on the camera that looks up, and then you put little stickers in the
Yeah. They're using
ceiling.
it in VR or XR all the time now. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
it's
but where would you put that in a big venue, a sporting venue like that? Where would you put the stickers?
on the ceiling.
Oh, wow. Way up
And
there?
yep, way up there.
No kidding.
So
And
you
that's
then
random, right? It's not there's no specific pattern.
so
It's
you
just
actually it's really important that it's random. It
right.
doesn't have like that it's not in a grid, because it detects where it is based off the distance from points and
Mm.
all that. Could talk about that for an hour. I think it's really, really cool
It's
tech.
fascinating. Yeah, it is. It
But you
is.
already brought up a good point that sometimes it might be hard to get access to the roof,
Right.
or for athletics, Stade de France, the roof might be just really, really, really high up,
Right.
or the sky.
Yeah.
So we also used what's it called, Pixitope,
Oh,
which is optical tracking, but with a separate survey camera. So at that point, we had a separate camera mounted on the front of the jib that was connected to the camera. We read out the sensor data,
yeah.
and we sent all that back
Neat.
into Voyager, which is the ROS.
Right.
It's built on top of it's kind of Unreal Engine, but the ROS version
Right.
that has like data link, ROS talk, some HDR fixes that we really needed for the show, and like an HDR pipeline that allows you to import those live video sources as HDR, but also output proper HDR. And then you also might spy there's an expression server there. We use expression because like with 3 venues, it's kind of hard to have like a Unreal Engine Voyager expert everywhere. So we had Chris who helped us doing the setup and for the first 2 venues, and then he flew out. But the good thing is with expression, we built a system where you can template all everything in there. So you can like, hey, I need to actually that runner just injured, and we need to change out what picture and what text we're showing.
Right.
Um, you could do that in expression, and it then communicates to Voyager, which is really great because that's what expression is for, right? Like you have all the text
Sure.
tools, everything of
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So you didn't
Yeah.
have to rebuild that in a separate interface. You can just use the already existing thing, send it over to Voyager. Voyager makes great graphics out of it. Yeah, but like, yeah, we use Pictotope, that tracking data, and then that's one of the cool things with this workflow. Every single venue had a difference in just like how it worked and how we like what the requirements were, but it all was the same workflow that we were able to record video and tracking data and play it back together. So at that point, you could always shift the time, do a little thing there,
Mm.
all of that, which I that paid off like hugely for us. The producers really liked it. Yeah, and like what is interesting with this Rex as well is we could remote into all of it. So like we had team view
So
on.
using, you didn't actually have to be next, like you said, you weren't that, which I've been next to those guys that bring in the racks and racks, Hawkeye, that you know, racks and racks of servers, and then you're just sitting on top of a whole bunch of hot servers in the room. So you didn't have that. So you just had small workstations to interface with, the laptops or whatever, and monitors.
No, so we had an operator rack that is, I think, a 4U rack. We had a big LG monitor, the one that
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an LG that has the where you can put 4 HDMI's
Yeah,
in.
the I have them here. Yeah, the
Yeah,
69.
it's
Yeah,
really cool monitor. So we
yeah.
were able to route 2 outputs on the top left and right were multi-viewers, and below that were 2 KVM stations that allow you access to any of our
Perfect.
systems.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
on top of that, we not only had support that way, but we could also remote into each of that system remotely because we had internet access. So,
Mm-hmm.
like you might imagine, if you do 3 venues, finding 3 engineers or paying for 3 engineers
Right.
might be harder than having one. So what
That
we
can
did
access
is
it all.
I
Yeah.
was in Paris still, and I could access every single of those racks. And at some point, we had all 3 venues running at the same time. We had a little multi-viewer. I do love my multi-viewers and WebRTC multi-viewers. They could see everything, but the whole team always knew where every single one is. So our
Right.
Voyager Unreal Engine expert could see, oh, that graphic, actually, we need to change the lighting or something, and could remote in. I could be like, oh, actually, we need to fix the routing here, or maybe audio is wrong. Um, so that was really, really cool, and like seeing that all work was kind of neat.
Yeah. I can only imagine. This is your second Olympics, isn't it,
No, it
Jonas?
is my first
This was
Olympics.
your first. Okay. Tucker did the other one, right? Tucker did
Yeah,
okay,
Tucker. I
in
think he might have.
Madison.
I think he did like this might have been his third. He did like
Oh, okay.
there's Bo.
I'll
Yep.
just quickly jump in to say we've been joined by a Olympic celebrity. So Brad I didn't give him a heads up, but Brad's here, so he should probably jump in at some point and talk about his work at gymnastics.
Oh, hey, Brad. Good to
Hey,
see
hey,
you.
how's it going? Good. So I'd pick up a little bit on what Jonas was saying. Just one of the things he pointed out, just as I jumped on here, uh, the ability to record, and the tracking data. So for example, all of Primetime Olympics was edited in a posted show. The daytime stuff was live. So for example, we might not have the footage that we wanted to put in the virtual window at the time that we wanted to do it, but we would they would record, like the jib guy would do several moves back and forth at the time that we wanted to put that in the show, and then we would go back and post that, and the tracking data was there, so I could feed the Ross EVS or something, and we could basically bank that shot even though we weren't ready for it when the jib guy actually made the move.
That
So,
that's pretty powerful stuff.
so like time traveling stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
we could say coming up next, and you see those people getting ready while we're recording it. They might not have been in the arena yet.
Hmm. Breaking, you're pulling back the curtain here is what you're doing. So it wasn't all what it looked like. So perfect all the time.
It was. I mean, the other thing too that Ross did was getting was taking full HDR. In the past on Thursday night, we had down converted the signal to them to SDR. So this was the first time I worked with them in the workflow where they were fully HDR all the way through. So,
And did you guys feel like that was its own set of challenges, working in full HDR?
I've been doing it since about 2017. NBC started it with Notre Dame, which was a whole test for Tokyo. We've been doing it on Thursday night for 2 years, and then into there. It's gotten to the point where most of the people now on the NBC side understand the workflow because we've kind of been doing it the same way for about 6 or 7 years now. So it's the only problems that you kind of run into sometimes is monitoring. Like sometimes you don't know what you're looking at. Am I looking at an HDR signal and an SDR monitor? The scopes really become your friend when it comes to all
Yeah.
that.
We've been doing HDR since Tokyo in the AR world. And yeah, I mean, it's the key. So the key is the Sony TriMaster monitors, where there were several venues where, or at least, there were several times where we had a better monitoring setup than the than the V1. So they were kept asking us like, "Hey, this looks double leaded." I'm like, "Look, I can show you on my monitor. It is perfect, and here's the waveforms to prove that it's perfect." So there were several times where it's like, "All right, let's make sure that everybody's looking on a good monitor and looking at a waveform to know what they're seeing, so that everybody's speaking the same language."
I could completely think that was probably one of the challenges. I figured that was probably one of the largest challenges, was like, how do you monitor that? Because you would just have one source of truth, right? But your multi-viewers, Jonas, that you had up and you were looking at, those were just sources at that point.
So for example, for our multi-viewers, we down converted it to SDR. Okay. So it's still true. We use those really, really great NBCU LUTs. You can even find them on GitHub. It's great. You can just download them. They even work in the Blackmagic bidirectional converters. It's your little tidbit for today. You can just download them, put them in there, and suddenly you have a conversion box for like $50. It's really cool.
That's good.
But like Bo said, I came pretty new to this team, but what was great is you have a team that has done it for a long time. We've tried it. We tested it. We knew exactly, hey, this is, if we're getting this, we're going here. And we had this monitoring setup where what we did is we had a pro point in every pipe or step in our pipeline. So if someone came in and said, hey, XYC doesn't look like HDR, we could go, this is the jib feed you're feeding us. This is it after our first step. This is our second step. This is what we send you. and you could like check exactly like where in the pipeline if there is a configuration issue, where that is. Or you could just show, look, it looks the same with AR or without AR. So we had a little 2 buttons there where we could do that. Then we had this great Sony monitor with the setup. And like, I feel like if you just do all of it HDR, like our whole kit was HDR, it starts to get easier. And then obviously if you have great people that have the experience.
It's really just a lot of the graphic stuff. Most graphics are still done in an SDR world. So Ross was by Ross being in a whole HDR world, it does simplify it, but the graphics machines, telestrators, a lot of that stuff is still in an SDR world. So that's where just making sure that, everything got LUTted properly, because you don't want to LUT the key channel, you want to LUT the fill. So you have to run both of them through frame syncs, because for timing purposes, you got to have the fill and the key line up. So it's just a lot of frame syncs, but mostly for all the graphic devices. Everything else is pretty much full HDR as far as the cameras.
And that's probably what was the most of the conversion, or not conversion, but the open gearbox was a lot of frame syncs in that, is where you were saying? No,
like on our system, no, we were 100% HDR. We got HDR sources and we outputted HDR.
Afterwards.
What Brad is saying is in the TOC, in the truck, the graphics that we were fed sometimes needed the LUT applied.
So, Brad, explain your role. Explain, because me and Jonas are talking from the Ross side, but Brad was from an overall.
I just push the buttons. I TD. So I've TD gymnastics since Rio. I did figure skating for Sochi and Korea, and I've done 3 closings. So I didn't have to stay for closing this year, which is always kind of a last minute hodgepodge. So I got out of there early this year.
Yeah, it was. I tuned out pretty quick on it. Up until Snoop, man. I mean, he brought the show home at that point. But then Billie Eilish.
That handoff was great, though.
Yeah. It was good.
From my hotel, I have a video of the fireworks that made it all worth it.
I could imagine. All right, so let's talk experience. For what you can talk about, I'm sure the days were short, only like 1 or 2 hours, right? That's all they were ever on the air. Just like normal sports, right? You show up a couple hours beforehand. So how was the typical day for you there?
It wasn't that bad, actually. Like that is one of the big things working with this team within Ross. And like I think Bo and I both we got good amounts of sleep. Like you can't do 35 days really good stuff on low sleep. So during the prep, I think I get like 8 hours most of the nights. And then one of the great, like we didn't do all of the sessions. Often like when there was no American involvement in it and like kind of low stakes, we didn't work those. And we at some point like we had great operators who could like also do stuff by themselves. So no, like there were like maybe 2-3 nights where I had long days. Most of those were like strikes when you're waiting for everything to be ready. And
so sign me up for Jonas's gig then.
All right, so
mine
Brad, what was yours
brutal.
like?
I had 119.5-hour day. The problem with an edited Olympics, and especially our venue, is that daytime was live. I believe it was airing on like USA Network, and sometimes it would pop on NBC. That was actually being done out of a truck in Stanford. So they had 16 MediaLink AT&T paths, including our truck program. So they would pop onto our program. We would cut some American routines for them, and then we would stop down calling for prime time, and then they would continue on with OBS or the world feed coverage. But we basically then edit all of our stuff and craft it specifically for prime time. So we would kind of you lay out for all the, like, you're waiting for scores, and there's nothing that really changes as far as the content. It's just you're pulling everything up to tighten it up. Because what happens is primetime says we want 5 segments that total 38 minutes. And you can't, and then they'll go away from us for an hour and come back and say we need 3 more segments at 20 minutes. But one person can't be finishing up that last apparatus that you were on 40 minutes later. So you have to get all of your stuff in this chunk, and then a whole nother section in another chunk. So we basically have to sit there and edit it to time, based on kind of filling in where they have holes throughout the day.
I knew that was happening, but I could not. I can't fathom it. But as you're explaining it, I'm thinking about that is complex. That's not a trivial little thing to do.
Yeah, so we had 4 edit turnarounds that were in our venue, that handle them, and sometimes they're fine, like it's like I said, we usually call it pretty much as it is. We're not changing
Right.
anything.
Right.
It's just a score might take 2.5 minutes to come up, and so we basically, the flow is you pretty much would cut the routine, and you'd go to replay, and then you just pause, and then the edit, and then essentially the edit just puts the replay move out, and then we call the score, and then cut to the next athlete
Gotcha.
doing that. So that's kind of the flow we try to keep. The Jordan Childs bronze appeal got us all fouled up on the last night,
Oh, I can imagine.
because we didn't really know at the exact time what was going on. Like, it took us a few minutes to figure out what was even taking place. So we had to kind of piece that together. Again, like, we didn't change the storyline. It's just, you just have to edit it and
Assemble it
tighten it
and
up.
put it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
to a something that makes sense.
Sure.
So we should have been out of there several hours earlier on the last night, and that totally fouled us up. So
Several hours earlier.
yes,
Oh,
we were done. We had
oh.
all our segments almost ready to go. We were ready to start feeding them, and then we got totally bogged down in that storyline. So
I can imagine. I can only imagine. I actually own a gymnastics facility, and so the family, everybody was watching it. Pretty adamantly and everything, and a lot of our coaches were chat groups and stuff like that, and with all that happening, it was just like a storm blew up in our world, in the whole gymnastics world. That my wife she runs that business. I do something different, but it was like, holy cow, this is big for that world. It was a big thing. It was a major thing. So I can only imagine having to play along and not know what's going on.
Well, and the only other 2 nights that we had in Tokyo were the night that Simone dropped out, and then the night that Suni won the gold all around. Those were 2 nights that we watched the sun come up in Tokyo, just because of trying to. Again, we called it all pretty much as it happened, but then all of a sudden, primetime says, "All right, now that Simone's out, we want less. You get less."
Yeah.
And then Sony wins, and it's a storyline. So then they say we want more. So then you're trying to fit all this to time, and that's what bogged us down.
So Robert Green asked, and I realize that I know what he does for a living a lot too. So he asked, what about on the editing side? Is it being done in a replay system, none to be named, or is it true editors that you can name?
It's for Avid editors.
So Avid,
that were in an Avid edit.
But Robert Green's an EBS guy, so there's also a heavy EBS presence on the show.
Yeah. So, but they were truly editing for all those packages and tightening it up and everything. I say truly.
Some of the times we thought we could have edited it on EBS faster, but
to get the render out.
Yeah, exactly. But they do a couple of multi-view records. So if we need to go find a shot, they've got 2 multi-views of basically every camera recorded, that they record, so they can get the time code on there, and then they can look at the multi-view and say, oh, this person was shooting this athlete at that time, so they can go find if we need a scoring shot or whatever. That's typically how they go and find those.
Yeah, that's probably worth highlighting a little more, because that's kind of a crazy workflow that I think was new for this games, where the Avids are recording multi-viewers and then literally saying, okay, the one in that box right there is what I want to edit into my piece. And they're telling the EVS producer, like, hey, send me that one full
Export that.
screen now. Yeah.
Oh wow, that is an interesting workflow, but I mean it makes sense. So you don't have
Because
to
the Avid's not going to
forever.
record as many feeds as the EVSs are. They're
Right.
just going to record a couple. So they're able to then say, hey, it's kind of like a proxy. Like, hey, this little box, I want the full res version of that guy
Yeah,
at this
that's a
time
good
code.
idea.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good idea for that many cameras. All right, so Brad, fellow TD, how many cameras in the gymnastics setup? I lost count.
So we had about 18 of our own. Trying to think. And then we end up taking about 4 or 5 splits per apparatus. OBS is the Olympic Broadcast Service, which is the world feed of it. I'd say we took about 3 or 4 of their cameras per apparatus. And then we also would take phases of cameras to then put into our EVS. So like the vault rail cam is a
Ooh,
slow-mo cam, so we would take the 3 phases
right.
of that. I want to say in phases would be included in this. I think we take about close to 50 OBS splits.
I think it was close
Um,
to 80.
was it closer to
Wow.
80 with the splits?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because also, well, at least what flew through TOC.
yeah. I know we had, what did we have, 120 or 110 lines of IPGs going from the TOC back to the truck, and we
Yeah.
were full. We were
So
full on
that's,
that.
so that's what we're talking about. So OBS sends feeds from OBS world to the NBC, TOC, Technical Operations Center, I guess, at the venue, and that all hits a Ross Ultrix, and then in the TOC that gets passed along to from OBS that hits the NBC TOC with an Ultrix, and then that gets passed to the IPG that connects it to the actual truck that Brad's sitting in. So
And
there's this whole
and the
handoff between all the OBS feeds that NBC is paying for from the world feed, and then it gets mixed with the NBC ISO cameras that they control in the truck.
and the only reason we didn't have the IPGs in Tokyo. Our TOC cabin was a distance from where the truck's parked this time,
Okay.
so that's why we had the IPGs from the NBC TOC to the truck. I believe in Tokyo that was all just on copper.
Oh, so let's talk that. Were we all SMPTE 2110 here? Right? I mean, this is the
Yeah,
future. We're living in
the whole truck was an IP truck.
oh wow.
It had just come from Wimbledon, an EP truck.
Yeah.
That had just come from Wimbledon.
Nice. That's
So
that's got to be a big difference in just setup and implementation.
it
Oh,
is, like
something this
the
large.
engineers were British, and like we're speaking the same language in some ways, but like we
I
go
know.
about it
I
like
know.
we would
Exactly.
we would like we'd ask him to do something. He's like, "Why do you guys do it this stupid way?" Or like the more complicated way. And once we were all set up after the first 10 days, those guys were just chilling for 2
Right.
weeks.
Right.
So it's a lot of that, just why are you guys doing it this way? What's going on? But it was nothing too bad. So I would
Garbage.
say,
How
like,
many,
I would
Brad?
say
How
the
many
big
years of
things are like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry? I was just gonna say, how many years of experience did you have on that switcher before
Oh,
you punched this show?
so I was in a grumpy mood. I was on a grass kahuna.
What?
We were, so all three venues were on kahunas. They were all NEP British trucks. A couple years ago, apparently, when Premier League started doing 4K, those were the only switchers that could do what they needed to do. So the kahuna is very big in the UK trucks. So we all three were on them. I had a guarantee, and I was gonna learn it, and then the EIC and the guarantee knew it very well, and I was just like, do this, like build this button to do this. And I kind of became just a button pusher at that point. I didn't do hardly any programming
Yeah.
just because for a week, I just didn't want to take the time to sit down and really learn it.
Sure.
There were 4 of us, and we were all in a grumpy mood just because we don't know the switcher proficiently. But we got through. It's not a effects intensive or a large. It's not a large show. It's just sources,
Right.
but there's not a
Right.
ton of effects when it comes to all that.
That's pretty amazing though, that the kahunas.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
Because that's not here, right? In the US trucks, it's
No,
high-ends
so
period. K-frame.
yeah, K frames, and then I actually have a Kula on Thursday night, just as a lifeboat switcher, which we've never really programmed. Like we have 10 cameras and the 3 graphics in there, so it could be a lifeboat. But I haven't really like built anything out on it. It's just a little panel like the size of a 1ME Black Magic. Um,
Right.
type panel that just sits over to the side and I don't touch and make sure it works every week. So
Check it off the checklist and you're
yeah.
done. Right? Okay. So
Uh,
question we had from Twala, where are all the camera ops from around the world? Were they mostly local that you know of, or were they and was that coming from Ross? I mean, this Ross group, from what I understand, was strictly on AR and such. But Brad, you were
Good.
in the TD position. Tell us a little bit about what were the camera operators like,
So
and were they English?
So our camera ops were all the NBC cameras were all US. That most of them have worked gymnastics in the past. We had a group that kind of retired in Tokyo. That was the last one. We had about 3 or 4 guys that retired. They had been doing it since like Sydney or before Sydney. And so all the NBC guys, 1 guy's from Canada, 2 guys from Canada, but they've worked on this crew before. The OBS broadcast is Chinese broadcast that does the host broadcast, and I know some of those guys have been doing it since Rio and before, because some of the camera guys that have been in London and Rio, they all kind of knew each other and see each other, but all of OBS for gymnastics is Chinese.
Interesting.
But not much interaction other than just following each other around on the floor, and we kind of take second priority to OBS. Like we essentially, the guys will walk around with basically their hand on the other guy's back, so because they're wireless, they're RF handhelds, and so basically, so they make sure that they don't get trapped or blocking a shot. They just kind of try to stay right on their tail if they're right behind them. So
are you having to do much directing then? So you're just basically following along with what you have for the most.
we the only times that we take OBS cameras are like this. We mostly would be on NBC cameras during the NBC coverage. We would take OBS if sometimes like all of our cameras would be with the Americans and we needed a Japanese guy on an apparatus that all of our guys weren't with him when they did it. So we would just go back and take that apparatus feed if we wanted that routine. But that's pretty much how that works.
That's interesting. How about now? This is kind of an out there question. Did either of you or 3 of you, did any of you get a chance to go see the breakdancing? We've heard that it was amazing.
I was already home when it happened. I watched it from my house.
I'm sorry.
I did not. I did get to the beach volleyball venue one evening, and actually ended up meeting another office hours guy there, Nate Hall. But yeah, I got to see the volleyball under the Eiffel Tower one night, so that was kind of my treat.
And there was some pretty good visuals in that venue. I enjoyed watching some of the coverage on that.
I mean, all of the venues were just great. Like Paris, like talking about the experience, Paris really set a high bar from like transportation. I had a nice view of the crowds, and it was super interesting to watch how they did the crowd management, and like they staged people around the building so people wouldn't like run into the venue in groups. But then it's like the small things, like none of them were in the sun, like they were all in the shade stage. There was a lot of like police and military presence, but like I never had any issues, except for one time when that planned terrorist attack in Vienna became public, and then suddenly everything got a little more stricter. But with your accreditation, you still got through pretty well. But yeah, like everywhere you went into the city, there was like something Olympic, even when like often I had to travel to venues when there were active games, and I was like, oh, that's gonna be a nightmare, just like transportation was, and even that was fine. Like they really had it under control with the metro. Yeah, they
I,
set a high
I,
bar for
I
LA.
thought it was highly successful because if you think back to, Sochi was, just the kind of being in Russia, Rio was Zika, South Korea was North Korea, Tokyo was COVID. Like this, Beijing was kind of the COVID aftermath. This one was one where we all left home to go over there, and there wasn't like a talk of, what's going to happen. Like we almost were like, are we are we getting too excited about this? But I thought the city did an amazing job with it. Everything was, very clean, very organized, and I think it's one of the most successful ones that I've been around for sure.
It does sound like we have some high bars for LA next time around.
I mean, public transport won't be an issue for LA, right?
No, not at all. No, we never have traffic jams in California.
Like that was one of the things. Like I could get from Jersey, the gym venue, to like athletics in half an hour to an hour, and same for swimming. But just taking the metro, and we had a metro card that let us just take it, and it was very, very convenient. Like we often looked like, oh, it would be an Uber faster, and most of the time would be like twice as long. I once got stuck in an Uber for 2.5 hours for a 20-minute ride. Was the worst Uber drive ever. Not because of the driver. He didn't speak any English. That was kind of frustrating. But apart from that, it was great. We got sent. It was, I think it was like shortly before opening. It was on the day of opening ceremony. So we drove onto the interstate and were sent the other direction. And he like had to drive for like half an hour out of the city, turn there, but everybody turned there. And like literally an hour or 2 hours into the journey, I passed the same exact building I came from again, just going the other direction. That was
I'll
the
take the
only
blame for
time.
that. I sent Jonas on a mission to pick up a piece of backup gear that he's like, thinking we would never need this. Like, why do I have to go to the office to get this? And as it turned out, the next day we needed it. So,
Yeah, but
thanks, Jonas.
Olympics 101, you never go anywhere on opening ceremonies day.
I
Like
know.
everything's locked down. You
Yeah.
don't try to get anywhere at
I
all.
felt
Metros,
even worse
it
because
was
while he was
fun.
stuck in an Uber, I was alongside the river watching opening.
Yeah.
So I did feel pretty bad about that.
I was
had an
about to ask.
interesting view of opening though. Like it was funny. I watched it in French TV, and like as they did the fireworks and the flyover, like I could look out of my window and saw all the like aerial stuff, and then I like turned over to the TV and was like, oh, now it's happening there. That was kind of neat.
So did any of you guys see pictures of the boats from opening? I don't know if
We
it
watched
is.
the opening, but
That's
you mean?
So
so that's super interesting. Yeah.
So the boats had, I wish I had a picture. I try to find one, but they basically had about a 8 to 10 foot truss, like
Right.
4 trusses, and then a camera going across. And one of the guys that was part of the rehearsals, he was like, "Man, I don't know how these things aren't going to get top heavy and tip over." But they were so they had a couple robotic cameras that were following some of these boats, and they do a U-turn, and you just you just watch them this slow U-turn of trying not to tip over. But I wish it hadn't been
Well,
raining like it was on opening, but
all
I
right,
think it
so
would
I
have
have
been.
Germond, one of NBC's camera operators and Steadicam guys. So he was on the Team USA boat, and so their primary transmission path from the Team USA boat, they had RF relays to shore receivers. All right, and
Right.
then they had a backup live view with 8 SIM cards, and then they backed that up with Ethernet from two Starlink dishes with 2 more SIM cards. So they on the boat they had 4 different ways out, and it worked flawlessly.
And what was it, like 220 phones, which was like I never even saw any footage from that. So wherever
So
that ended
that
up,
that was the world feed. OBS did a
oh,
collaboration with Samsung where they had all of those phones. Um, Orange actually built a special 5G network along the SAN for all of those phones. And funnily enough, we were talking about it at dinner, and suddenly one of our graphics ops is like, "Oh, would you like how that worked?" I'm like, "Yeah, that like." What software did they use? And he's like, "Oh yeah, my friend did that. I can ask him if you really want." I'm like, "Yeah, do that."
nice. They're very nice.
Another
I thought it was amazing and I was like, that looks like a phone on the pole. Why would they have a phone out there? Because we could see video, and it's like I never saw that angle. But that makes sense that if it was going, out, like they may do a one boat all the time just for that country kind of feed, or a multi-viewer feed that you could choose from if you wanted to. But I thought that was pretty interesting for the amount of content that they were coming back off of the boats too. And the ones that I was watching those, Brad, the ones with the jibs, or I say jibs, but the heads on the top. And I was thinking the same thing too. It's like, man, he's cutting that corner kind of quick, and I could just see it moving, and I was like, how in the world are those gyroscopes keeping up with that kind of movement? But up until the
yeah.
point of the heavy rain, I thought all that was just really amazing. And then once it heavy rain, I was like, okay, somebody didn't really plan well enough, because there was a lot of dirty lenses,
Yeah.
lot of dirty
So
lenses.
one of the things I didn't know much about, I saw one of the OBS guys walking around with a high vision backpack that looked like a live view with this giant triangular antenna. And apparently they had private 5G networks like in our venue, and the high vision was more coming back almost like real time like RF, versus we had a couple live views, like some of those shots where it was the camera was like right next to the parents, that
Mhm.
was a live view rig, and then we had a live view receiver, and those were about 5 seconds delayed. But
Makes
these
sense.
high
Yeah.
vision ones were almost real time. I didn't know any much about them, and I didn't have a chance to ask anyone, but I don't know if anybody else found out any information about those. I'm not
There
familiar with
was
that setup.
a lot of usage of high vision and especially the AV West bonding. So that also was the software that was running on the phones. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
it was their software, similar
I
to like the
forgot what
LU
it's
Central,
called.
not
Yeah,
LC, the
the
LU Smart.
AV
Yeah.
West version.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
I,
Ivy West was originally from Europe, so that makes sense. And High Vision purchased them, so they had a huge. I'm very familiar with Ivy West, but the tennis work we were doing, they were always the backup for a backup of choice for IMG instead of LiveView. And so, yeah, it's interesting though that they were using the 5G, though seems to be the thing, like private 5G seems to be the next step for a lot of event work. But I mean, it was. I talked to the guys at Verizon at NAB last year, even I think it was, and it was in the 6 figures plus to even have a conversation. So I could only imagine
so
with these one of a time type special events. Yeah, it makes sense, but average
in
stuff maybe not.
So the interesting thing with 5G is I don't know the regulations in France, but I could envision them being similarly to Germany. One of the reasons why it is catching on in Germany is that a certain amount of the frequencies is tied to the location. So you as a stadium, you have allocated 5G frequencies
Mhm.
that you then can be, hey, telecom, hey, Vodafone, give me those frequencies and I want to coordinate them. You can then say, hey, you actually manage the backhaul, the data, and all that. So you can do this medium thing where you have like private 5G frequencies that you have priority on, but that are not directly like downlinked into you. But then if you just look at the 5G Olympic stuff, there was a lot of the direct private cells. So you actually create your own cell tower basically, and that is still very expensive. But those are kind of like the two things. You work with a big provider and they carve out a space for you, or you can license the space and then set up your own cell towers. And that's how you can get that really, really low latency. But especially with 5G, at least in Germany, the venue has its own rights. So like Börse Center, for example, it's way easier to coordinate that than like coordinating 4G rights with all the different providers.
Makes sense. Yeah, that does make sense. And that's the next step. I mean, the fast is so fast for capabilities wise. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of us in the sports world, because it's going to be something that it's not going to be stepped on by a lot of other RF in the area. So what about that? So you had RF cameras, I'm sure, Brad, on the floor, right? Was it flawless, or would you say it was typical and just?
So the one new thing that we did this year, that we had to get a workaround for trials, and Sony came out with a release is we had wirelessly, we had an RF live output, and we had the 3-phase Mo. And that's something that we had not had before. We ended up having, I don't know how they conjured it up on trials, but it wasn't working how it was supposed to, out of one output, I believe, at the camera. Um, and they conjured something up. But Sony did have an update. So I would say that was, we've always done RF at Olympics. We usually do hardwired at the year round gymnastics events. But because of this whole OBS on the floor and people tripping over everything, and we're going to every apparatus, uh, we are RF. We have 4 RF cameras. And then I'm assuming OBS probably had roughly 4 or so, but then they have their cameras, would always be stationary. So they end up doing basically an integrated feed, and then they'll do individual apparatus feeds.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, well, and maybe to kind of speak to what Tlaloc was asking and kind of take a step back. So OBS is the Olympic Broadcasting Service, and they are the world feed, right? So they hire, they're kind of they kind of own the venue from a broadcast standpoint, and then each country's media rights holder buys commentary stations and buys or rents or buys the rights to commentary stations, or like NBC buys the rights to certain camera locations so that they can put their own cameras there. So everything's kind of secondary to OBS's world feed coverage, and then everybody buys access. All the media rights holders for each country buys rights to carry the OBS stuff or to use OBS feeds, or add on top of that with their own stuff. So our experience is mostly with the American rights holder, but that's where like Mickey and a lot of the other office hours guys worked on the OBS side of things. So they were world feed. We were mostly American broadcast feed.
And I can speak from the German perspective. It actually is a common issue that in commentary they're like, oh, where's our guy? Because they have the world feed and they're covering all of the nations, but we are really interested in the action of our sprinter who might not be up enough to be in focus right now. So especially in venues where you don't really take you just take the world feed, then you also like kind of have to hope that they cover your athlete. So in Germany, that was a big thing where like if they're not good enough to be there close, you're kind of out of luck.
Right.
So that's where like the NBC actually buy, like even just buying the cameras and the feeds and then being able to switch them has a lot of benefit because they can switch to the American athletes.
No matter where they
Well,
are.
a lot
Yeah.
of the German
Right.
broadcasts didn't pay for that. And then you just see all of the athletes. And you're like, I really don't care about this one right now. I want to see what this one does. Like at bouldering, for example, 4 athletes go at the same time, but they highlight one of them. So our guy is going. I'm like, show me our guy. But they showed all 3 other ones after one of the
Yeah, you
other.
saw that a
and
lot
then
in
showed
light,
us.
light
And I was
athletics
like,
too. When there was a large race,
yeah.
and the German commenters just had to sort of like say interesting things as they were passing by these other people. It was kind of funny.
Sometimes
Yeah,
you'll
so-
see sometimes you'll see the networks like, for track and field, they might put, one at what's kind of usually like a camera 3 down the home stretch. Like they might buy a position there or buy just like an ISO, like a camera 2 type position so that they can kind of pick off. But then you get into things like, if they don't buy the Omega clock, when they cut out, they're going to get like the clock's going to cut off. So like just even buying the Omega key and fill would be something that you have to buy. They're not just going to give
I
it
didn't
to you.
even think about it on that level. Holy cow, that could add up.
Yeah.
That could
So
really.
like in Germany, you sometimes get the replay, but not live because they didn't pay for all the data. Like the late night dance, all of that is in the world feed. But if you now cut your own world feed, you need your own team for that. So like sometimes in Germany we have, and here's the replay of that, but we couldn't show it to you live during the race.
Oh, wow.
So NBC brings in, they have their own Omega team so that when they do the lane idents, they can highlight the American lanes differently than the other lanes.
Right.
So that's a whole nother team added on to do more graphics.
All right, so let's talk teams real quick. Bo, how many were on your Ross team that were there underneath you?
At one point, we had 8 people in country. By the end of it, we were down to 3 or 4 maybe.
Okay.
We were able to. 3 people came over from America. We hired freelancers, including Jonas from one Parisian and 2 Germans. So we didn't travel everybody, but we got to have 7 or 8 at any given point.
So having worked out of country myself several times, and I've worked in Canada where they said it was the real French. So what was it like working? Did you have any real language issues with any of getting things done on the local basis? I don't know if Jonas knew this or not, but he has a little bit of an accent sometimes. So what about you, Bo, from South Carolina?
No, I mean, honestly, the way that the American host broadcaster handles things, like all of Brad's crew, a lot of Brad's crew also works Thursday Night Football. So most of that crew we were very familiar with. Like, we working. Honestly, we weren't working with a ton of locals.
Right.
Although any locals we did work with were amazing, and a lot kinder than I had heard the French might be. We never had any issues there. But no, I mean, English is the primary language of the technical operations of the game, so we never had any issues. I have worked. So this was my 7th, technically 8th Olympics, but 7th in country. And in previous Olympics, this is only my 3rd or 4th on the broadcast side. I'd worked on the venue side before and the IOC side of things, where I was the only American, the only one who natively spoke English on a team of 20. So in places like Russia and South Korea, that became very challenging. But no, the way that the Olympics are run with the American broadcaster, it's much easier to operate, and everybody's pretty much an expert at what they do. So, and that's the thing. It was kind of funny, kind of teaching Jonas like how to work in the Olympics system.
Right.
Because Jonas you know, and we've all been this way at some point in our life. Like you're kind of the guy that like shows up and you have to make everything work, and you have like maybe on a good day 36 hours before showtime to do it. You know, so it's like, hey, Jonas, like, don't worry. Like, we don't need this to work until Wednesday. It's Sunday afternoon. We're not going to hustle the guy that needs, you know, because there's a guy that we need to help us to make things happen, but
Right.
we don't need to
It-
worry about it yet. Like, he'll get to
NB
it. But
NBC's been doing it long enough that they basically just send out a ton of gear, and they know what to send, and you kind of just hope that with everything they've sent that you've got enough monitors for the booth, and talkback boxes and all this stuff that just comes from these shipments that come in. They pretty much have it down based on the plans from previous Olympics, what ended up going out. I mean, they got Pelican cases of just power cords and stuff, because we got in a situation in Rio where just like power cords. So then in Korea, all of a sudden these blue Pelican cases of just power strips, just stuffed full of them, start coming. So you got more power strips than you need. So
Right.
they've got most of the logistics stuff down, and it basically is like you're working in an American compound,
Right.
just with some slightly different tools and stuff. So
And really weird power connections, of course.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah, but
actually
there's-
was funny. Like we prepped pretty strictly, and like I told Bo, hey, get this and that and here, like that power connector. And then I arrive on site and everything is US plugs. And I'm like, oh shit. We have everything. Like I ended up needing to convert like European Schuko plugs back to US because like everything was US. And then like at one venue I arrive and they're like, well, sorry, we only have like European Schuko. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I planned for.
I can
I
relate to that.
I worked on a cruise ship a few months ago, and it was a US plug that had 220 on it. We
Ooh,
stuck a meter in there, and I was like, wow, this is nice. I was like, I've never seen a deal like this before.
I can only imagine. I've ran into that. My
spicy
buddies at
Edison
Hawkeye
connector.
were moved everything because they're traveling the world doing tennis, doing the line calling and everything. And what they moved to is all IECs. So every power strip is just an IEC power strip, and so that was their way of standardizing. And then there's only one that you have to convert, is the one into the power strip, and then everything else is just standard.
That's basically what they've done in the IBC.
yeah,
That makes
same.
sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. But guys, it's been a great conversation. Brad, thank you for hanging out and jumping in. Bo, thanks for the invite, for bringing them in, and I know you've got some little ones you got to play with some more, and I'm jealous of you. Yeah, getting to spend the time. I'm personally taking my daughter this coming weekend off to school, and so we're empty nesting after this weekend, and yeah, it's been a tenuous week already. I can only wait. And
It's the
Jonas,
best.
thanks so much for being up late. And I know you got a crazy schedule and all, but man, thanks so much for being around. And I really appreciate everybody that's watching and jumping in with questions and everything like that, guys. This was a great conversation, and it's great to hear about some of the insides that are happening. So thanks again, and that makes another episode of What Makes It Tick.